I always say, life spins in ways no Ferris wheel can match. And this story, my friend, had a rich man, the kind who thinks the world is an all-you-can-eat buffet and the poor a disposable cutlery. But he wasn't expecting two details: two starving twin boys, and a nanny with a tongue sharper than a butcher's knife. It was a muggy Wednesday, one of those days when the air feels heavier than overdue debt. At the top of the luxury condo, with marble even on the stair railings, silence reigned. A silence that masked an invisible noise, the growling stomachs of two children hidden in the service room, eating air and waiting for a miracle. The millionaire, Mr. Augusto, owner of properties, stocks, companies, and an inflated ego, didn't even truly acknowledge the boys. He thought they were the maid's kids from some bum who vanished. He ordered food left out, like you'd leave scraps for stray dogs, just to maintain a social image. And then, my friend, came the twist. The nanny, Mrs. Nanny, a woman of steel, wrinkles carved by life, and eyes of a mother who had lost a child, walked into his office with eyes wet from rage and a heart filled with second-hand shame. "Mr. Augusto, the boys are eating soap from hunger. Are you going to ignore this, or wait for it to hit the news?" He laughed. You know that laugh from someone rotten inside. That was it, mocking. "Mrs. Nanny, if I worried about poor people's kids, I'd never have time to manage my wealth." She froze, took a deep breath. The air felt like cement in her chest. And then she said, "Wealth may be what matters to you, but what truly has value, you lost that long ago and haven't noticed." That's when he trembled, but he hadn't fallen. Not yet, because what came next would bring even the strongest to their knees. If you enjoy a good story, hit that like button and subscribe, or you'll miss the rest of this tale that starts with hunger, but ends with justice. And justice, my friend, sometimes shows up in an apron and slippers, not a suit and tie. There are things we never forget, not even with Alzheimer's, and that morning left a scar on the nanny's memory that still burns in her dreams. The twins, Pedro and Paulo, 8 years old, sunken eyes, cracked lips, their bodies thin like broken promises, were curled up in the laundry room. One was chewing on a bar of soap like it was candy, the other licking the dirt off his palm, trying to find flavor where there was only dust. Mrs. Nanny, who'd cared for them since they were babies, burst in sobbing. "For the love of God, boys, what are you doing?" Pedro replied with a crooked smile that stabbed the soul. "I dreamed of food and woke up with the taste in my mouth." Paulo added, "We didn't want to bother anyone, Auntie. We've waited so long." She ran to the mansion's kitchen, but everything was locked, fridge full, pantry overflowing, but protected by an electronic code. "Security standard to prevent staff waste," read the sign on the door, coldly signed by Mr. Augusto himself. She collapsed, sat on the granite floor with her head between her knees. She cried like only someone who's seen too much can cry. But a nanny's tears don't become laws, and child hunger doesn't show up in a company's financial report. The situation was absurd, but no one saw it, or pretended not to, which is worse. Because inside that elegant house, where paintings were worth more than people, there was a hidden world. A world that smelled of mildew, tasted like tears, and had the name of injustice. Everyone believed the twins were kids left behind by some maid who disappeared, tolerated there out of charity. But Mrs. Nanny knew better. A rich man's charity is like the shadow of a streetlight. It only covers what's convenient. At a staff meeting, she tried to speak, said the boys were sick, needed food, a doctor, school. The mansion's manager, a man named Helio, replied, "Those brats are alive by miracle, Mrs. Nanny. You should thank the boss, not ask for more." And then came the first sign. Paulo's nose began to bleed. Pedro fainted out of nowhere. They were rushed to the mansion's private infirmary, and that's when the on-call doctor, while reviewing the house dependence file, furrowed his brow. "These boys have no records, but they're identical to Mr. Augusto's missing grandson." Silence. The kind that hurts more than screams. Because now, my friend, what used to be mere neglect was starting to look like something far bigger. And Mrs. Nanny, she held a secret letter that could either bury or save that family's empire. But it wasn't time to reveal it yet. Fate sometimes likes to watch the arrogant stumble before they fall. Some men hide behind money to avoid facing the mirror, and Mr. Augusto was one of them. When the doctor cautiously said the twins looked exactly like the grandson he believed had died 6 years earlier, the old man trembled, but only on the inside. Outwardly, he held his chin high like a king guarding his throne and replied with disdain, "Those brats have nothing to do with me. They're just the children of some careless maid, and that's final. I won't feed the poor's conspiracy fantasies." Ah, my friend, DNA deniers always shout louder than blood. But the doctor pressed on. "Forgive me, sir, but the tests show genetic compatibility with your family. I'm not saying they're your grandsons, but it's impossible to ignore." Augusto laughed. A dry, nervous laugh, the kind that tries to mask fear with arrogance. Genetic compatibility? Doctor, even manatees share DNA with humans. That's junk science. These tests aren't worth the paper they're printed on. And he stormed out, slamming the door, the sound echoing through the mansion like someone trying to shut the world up by force. But the doubt, that remained. It lingered, like termites in fine wood, gnawing from the inside out. That night the millionaire roamed the house like a restless ghost. He avoided everyone's eyes, but he couldn't resist one thing. He peeked, hidden, through the crack in the door to watch the two boys sleeping, curled up on an old mattress under a tattered blanket. And there, frozen, his hand trembling on the doorknob, he saw it, a birthmark on Pedro's shoulder, identical to the one his grandson had. He swallowed hard. His heart skipped a beat, but his mind... Oh, that stubborn mind. "I always thought that Mark was strange. Must be common." He repeated it to himself like a drunk man, convincing himself he can still drive. But at that very moment, in her small room, Mrs. Nanny opened a velvet box hidden in her mattress. Inside were 2 hospital bracelets with the mother's name, and the last name matched the boss's. But how could she say that? How could she prove it? How could she face a man who treated people like recyclable trash? She knew, if she spoke without proof, she'd lose everything. If she stayed silent, the children would lose even more. And meanwhile, Augusto was preparing a luxury trip to escape the rising storm. But what he'd find the next day in the garage would change everything. Because waiting for him there was the past. In flesh, bone, and the voice of a child. Yes, the world turns, and sometimes it turns with fury. And that muggy morning, as the sun glared through the armored garage glass, who waited for Mr. Augusto with wide eyes and bare feet, was Pedro. Yes, the boy, face dusty, holding a crumpled drawing in his hand. "Mister, can you take this to my mum, if she's up in heaven?" Augusto froze. The driver choked. And time... Oh, time stopped for 2 seconds. 2 seconds that felt like an eternity. The trembling paper in the boy's hand showed a stick-figure drawing. 2 boys holding hands with a woman in a long dress, and in the background, a house with a tree beside it. But it wasn't just any house. It was the old family farm, sold years ago after a tragedy Augusto never had the courage to face. The death of his youngest daughter. Or at least, that's what they said. "Who showed you this, boy?" he asked, his voice cracking, his face pale. "I remember. That's where we lived, before the bad men came." The bad men. That phrase echoed in Augusto's mind like a funeral bell. He stumbled to his office, ordered the gates closed, cancelled the trip, and for the first time in years, went to the nanny's room. "Mrs. Nanny, what do you know about these boys?" She hesitated, took a deep breath, pulled the velvet box from the closet and placed it on the desk, like handing over a ticking bomb. Inside, 2 hospital bracelets with the names Pedro and Paulo Gouveia de Almeida. Gouveia de Almeida, his daughter's last name, his own last name. "These bracelets, your daughter gave them to me before she disappeared. She didn't die, Mr. Augusto. She ran away, pregnant, scared, afraid of you. His hand shook, his face went pale. The memory struck like lightning in a clear sky. The argument, the slap, the slammed door. The last time he saw his daughter, with tears in her eyes and a belly just beginning to show. She hated me. She was afraid, because you swore no bastard would stain the family name. The words hit like stones. The empire of pride began to crumble in silence, but the worst was still to come. That night, as Augusto cried alone in the bathroom, an old letter fell from Mrs. Nana's wardrobe, handwritten by his own daughter, and in it a revelation that would tear his heart in two. They say if you seek, you'll find, but no one warns you that what you find might be worse than what you lost. And when Mr. Augusto read that letter, oh, my friend, it was like being shot with a bullet that didn't bleed on the outside, but destroyed everything inside. The trembling handwriting read, "Dad, if you're reading this, it's because you either found me or destroyed me. I ran because I loved, because the father of my children was poor. And you cared more about keeping the family name clean than keeping us together. But if these boys ever return to this house, treat them with the dignity I never had." A tear fell, the first in years, and it wasn't from pain, it was from shame. The next morning, Augusto did something he never thought he'd do, went to the police station. He wanted to register the boys, acknowledge them, maybe even tell the truth. But irony of fate, justice, that blind lady, had her eyes shut tight to the heart. The policewoman, a stern career officer, listened in silence, then said, "Mr. Augusto, are you confessing that 2 undocumented minors have been living in your home? That's a crime." "But I didn't know. I just found out. They're my grandsons. Their mother was my daughter. Do you have a birth certificate, any official proof of her maternity, living witnesses? Because as far as we know, your daughter was declared dead years ago, without a body, without a funeral. She wrote this letter. Look, a letter is not a legal document. You're telling me 2 minors are under your custody without legal records. That could be considered abduction, abandonment of minors, and identity fraud, if you try to regularize it without a court process. The room turned cold. Augusto felt the weight of the world. For the first time, he understood what it was like to be treated as guilty without a voice. "I'm a good man," he shouted, and the officer replied coldly, "Good men don't let children eat soap." He was escorted back home. With a warning, the boys would be taken to a shelter the next day until the court decided their fate. When he returned to the mansion, the staff was already murmuring. The driver whispered on the phone to his wife, saying, "The boss has finally lost it." The manager, Helio, with that fake smile, asked, "You really gonna register those brats, boss? Gonna leave the empire to nobodies?" That's when Augusto turned, and for the first time, he didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply said, "They're not nobodies. They're my daughter's children, and if this brings me down, so be it. But at least it'll bring me down doing what's right." But it wasn't going to end there. Because that night, as the boys slept for the first time on clean sheets, a court officer rang the bell with an order that would change everything. The sound of the doorbell that night was no ordinary chime. It was the echo of a judge's gavel striking before a verdict. The security guard answered, unaware of what was coming, and when he opened the gate, he found himself face to face with a cold-eyed court officer, grey vest, black folder, and a soul that looked long buried. "Good evening. I have here an emergency order of removal. 2 minors in irregular custody are to be transferred to the São Miguel shelter by order of the juvenile court." Augusto came down the stairs, face burning red. The nanny, Mrs. Nana, stepped out of her room, gasping for air. "No, they're safe here. I take care of them. I'm practically their mother." But the law didn't want to listen. "There is no legal documentation, ma'am. Their custody is unregistered. They have no valid birth certificates. Priority is protection, not emotion." The boys were woken gently, but even the world's greatest kindness couldn't hide the cruelty of that moment. Pedro rubbed his eyes and asked, "Auntie, are we going on a trip?" Paulo had already understood. He said nothing, just held his brother's arm and lowered his head. Augusto tried to stop them. He used his name, his money, his legacy. None of it worked. The judge's order is signed. Any resistance will be seen as obstruction of justice. He stood at the door, watching his grandsons being taken away in an old car with a cracked window and a makeshift seatbelt. 2 lives he had once rejected, and who now rejected him with silence. Mrs. Nanny cried without sound. She cried with her whole body, cried from her soul. She had tried everything and failed. Augusto returned to the house in a daze, locked himself in his office, drank, threw a bottle at the mirror, looked at the shattered reflection and, for the first time, said aloud, "They are my grandsons." And he collapsed to his knees, as if the ground had pulled everything from him. Pride, power, his name. Now everything was dust. The staff slowly began to leave. The house turned into a cemetery of memories. And the next morning, Augusto vanished. No note, no destination, no warning. The manager found his phone tossed in the garden, his shoes left in the hallway. No one could say where he went. Only the nanny could feel it. He went after them. But was there still time? Because São Miguel's shelter hid more secrets than its walls could contain, and inside, the twins were about to disappear again. At São Miguel's shelter, everything was concrete, iron, and silence. The pale green walls smelled of expired disinfectant. The tall gate creaked when it opened, and the smiles felt borrowed, like no one was sure if they were allowed to be happy. Pedro and Paulo were placed in a room with 3 other boys. 1 bunk bed to share, a thin blanket and a pale grey uniform. What little they had, drawings, improvised toys, was left behind, taken away as coldly as one would remove a fishbone. No ceremony, no warning. The first night was long and cold. Pedro cried quietly, face buried in a flat pillow. Paulo, quieter still, stared at the ceiling like he was speaking to God in the dark. "Do you think she'll come for us?" whispered Pedro. "She will. She always does. And the rich man? Will he come too? I don't know. But he looked at us different yesterday, like Mom used to." That same night, the nanny, Mrs. Nanny, did what only a heart mother can do. She went to the shelter with bread, milk, and a plea in hand. The director, stern, said, "Visits only with judicial authorization." But Nanny didn't beg. She handed over an old, faded blue notebook. This belonged to their mother, the daughter he lost. "If you won't open the door for me, open it for her." The woman read the name on the cover, Pregnancy Journal, Mariana Gouveia de Almeida. The director swallowed hard, and then she opened the door. Mrs. Nanny entered with trembling hands, found the boys lying down. When Pedro heard the door open, he turned in fear, but when he saw the nanny, his eyes filled instantly. "Auntie!" She rushed to them, held them both at once, with the force of someone holding on to their very soul. And there, on the cold floor of that shelter, she pulled a small medal from her pocket. "This belonged to your mother. She gave it to me. Told me to only give it to you if the world ever tried to take everything from you." Paulo held the medal and looked at it like he recognized it. "She wore it on her neck when she sang us to sleep." Silence fell, but it was a good silence, a silence of memory, of warmth. But outside, someone was watching, someone standing behind the reception glass, simple clothes, unshaven, hollow eyes that hadn't seen sleep in days. It was Augusto. He didn't say a word, didn't ask to enter. He just looked. And when he saw the boys hugging the nanny with the medal between them, he knelt right there on the sidewalk and cried, not out of guilt, but from loss, from longing, from love that arrived too late. But sometimes, my friend, late is still on time. The next morning, the São Miguel shelter's reception awoke with a different silence, as if the air was waiting for something. And it was. At exactly 8 a.m., Augusto returned, this time with head bowed, no driver, no suit, just him, and a brown envelope in his hands. The director raised an eyebrow. "You don't have authorization." He cut her off, voice hoarse. "I'm not here to take anyone. I came to deliver the truth." He placed the envelope gently on the counter, as if handling dynamite. Inside, a DNA test, secretly done, paid in cash, collected from a single hair plucked from Paulo's brush days before. Result, 99.999% match with Mariana Gouveia de Almeida, the daughter presumed dead, the daughter lost to pride. I'm their grandfather, and I'll prove it, even if it takes time. Even if it costs me everything. The director swallowed hard. A substitute judge was called. She arrived with firm eyes but a curious tone. She read the documents, listened to the story, reviewed the evidence. Mr. Augusto, you understand this could implicate you in crimes of neglect and abandonment. I do, but between protecting my name and saving my grandsons, I choose them. The judge didn't answer immediately. She simply asked for a recess. Meanwhile, the twins, who had been attending class with the other children, were called to the social room. When they saw Augusto there, they hesitated. Pedro stepped back. Paulo stared at him, silent. The tension could be cut with a fingernail. Augusto knelt, stretched out his hands, said nothing for a few seconds, then whispered, "I'm sorry." A whisper. "Sorry for not seeing you, Pedro, for not hearing you, Paulo, for loving my pride more than my blood. Your mother was my girl, and I lost her trying to seem strong. But today all I want is to start over, even if it's just with a hug." Pedro ran first, with a sob that ripped open the room. Paulo took longer, but he came too. Together, they threw themselves into the arms of the man who, despite everything, could still be something. The judge watched it all through the camera in the corner and made her decision. "I grant provisional custody to Mrs. Nanny, with supervised visitation by Mr. Augusto. The formal process will begin, but the most important thing is that they are together. And there, in that shelter where so many had only known pain, a new piece of history began to be stitched. It wasn't the end of the battle, but it was the beginning of justice. And justice, my friend, when it comes through truth, may take time, but it never fails." 2 months had passed since the court's decision. 2 long months that felt like years in the heart of anyone trying, day by day, to rebuild what silence and pride had broken. Mr. Augusto's mansion. It still stood, grand, luxurious, but strange, as if each wall now held a muffled scream. He no longer slept in the master bedroom upstairs. He moved into the old guest room on the opposite side of the house, said it was more practical, but deep down, it was penance. And the boys, oh, the boys now had names on paper. Pedro Gouveia de Almeida, Paulo Gouveia de Almeida. They received their new birth certificates directly from the judge's hand, with Mrs. Nanny standing beside them, holding them like she was holding pieces of her own soul. They cried when they saw their mother's name on the documents, and cried again when they learned that she had left behind a simple will written in a school notebook, entrusting their care to the nanny, in case anything ever happened. The will had no legal power, but it had enough symbolic weight to move the court. Mrs. Nanny, now legally recognized as their emotional guardian, set up a small room behind the main house. She refused to live inside, said she needed space, but everyone knew that's where love lived, and that's where the boys slept best. Augusto, for the first time, started learning not to give orders, but to ask. He learned how to cook rice without it turning mushy, how to fold school uniforms, how to pick the boys up from school without a driver, and how to listen to stories about imaginary heroes from children who had once survived abandonment. He went further. He sold one of his luxury apartments and used the money to found the Instituto Mariana, a community center to serve orphans and homeless children, offering food, shelter, and, most of all, affection. His daughter's name engraved in bronze on the entrance plaque. "May this house serve those who never had a roof. May this name remember the one who was forgotten," it read. Every Friday, he made sure to go there in person. He sat with the children, told them stories, not as the old millionaire, but as a grandfather. Little by little, The empire he built with bricks of pride became a bridge of affection. And the boys, they grew, strong, alive, still hungry, yes, but now only for learning. Until one morning, during breakfast, Pedro looked at his grandfather and said, "Grandpa, when I grow up, I want to help kids too, like you do." Augusto choked on his toast, and with a shaky voice replied, "Then you're already richer than I ever was at your age. Because in the end, wealth isn't what we accumulate, it's what we repair. What is time, if not a twisted mirror showing us what we didn't have the courage to face when it mattered most? Well, 3 years after that shelter, after that medal, after that sidewalk confession, life was no longer the same, and neither was old Augusto. On the house porch, where once only the sound of barking orders echoed, now came laughter, the smell of toast, and the soft voices of children saying, "Good morning, Grandpa." Pedro and Paulo were growing like branches of the same tree, each in a different direction. One talked too much, the other listened to everything. One dreamed of justice, the other of music. But both, my friend, both carried in their eyes the memory of hunger, and that shapes more than any inheritance ever could. Augusto, now with weaker hands, a more tired gaze, and a softer heart, lived in a different rhythm, a slower time, a more attentive one, and maybe a more honorable one. One warm Saturday, he woke up different, put on his best shirt, that pale blue one his daughter used to love, combed the few remaining hairs on his head, and said, "Today, I'm going where I should have gone a long time ago." He got in the car with Mariana's medal in his pocket and her notebook in an envelope. He asked Mrs. Nana to take him to the cemetery, the one he had avoided for over a decade. The car stopped beneath a dry tree, and he stepped out slowly, like someone stepping into his own past. The grave was simple, a white stone, her name etched with little care. Mariana Gouveia de Almeida, 1989. Yes, a question mark, because there was never a body, only absence. He knelt, not for religion, but for soul weariness, took the notebook from the envelope, kissed the cover, and said, "My daughter, I became everything I swore I'd never be. An absent father, harsh, cowardly. But your boys gave me another chance. And I'm trying, I'm trying every day." A breeze passed. A dry leaf fell to the ground. The silence around him seemed to listen more attentively than any living person ever had. "I created a place with your name, the Instituto Mariana. It's helping kids like yours, like you were. And everything they learn there comes from you." He pulled out a small wooden cross, made by Pedro at school, placed it on the grave. "Your son made this with his hands, said he wanted you to have something made by him, that you wouldn't be forgotten. But my daughter, you were never forgotten." On the way back, he said nothing, just held onto the medal as if it were the last thread tying him to her. When he got home, he found the boys waiting on the sofa. "Grandpa, you took a while, huh?" said Paulo. "I went to visit your mom." Pedro approached slowly. "Was she there?" Augusto answered with his eyes. "She was. In the wind, in the smell of the earth, in the silence. She was." And that day, for the first time, the three of them had lunch at the same table, not as rich or poor, guilty or victims, but as what they had always been, family. Some people think children only speak nonsense, that their voices are just background noise in the adult world. But some days, my friend, some days the whole world stops to hear a child, and not because they shout, but because they say what no one else dares. It was the official opening of the new wing of the Instituto Mariana, a beautiful new building with big windows, a colorful library, playrooms, and a community kitchen that smelled of fresh bread. A place where kids could just be kids, and more than that, where mothers with no ground to stand on could finally rest their feet. TV reporters arrived early. A suited-up city councilman, a priest, a retired judge, they all came. Everyone wanted to witness the social miracle funded by the once cold-hearted Augusto, the man who used to be untouchable, now hailed as the city's benefactor. But the one opening the ceremony wasn't him. It was Pedro and Paulo. both in crisp school uniforms, hair combed, hearts thudding like drums in a parade. They climbed the small improvised stage, greeted by soft applause. They held a hand-drawn sign with crooked, colorful letters. "Thank you for not giving up on us." The institute's director tried to take the mic to give a welcome, but Pedro raised his hand. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I speak first?" And he spoke. "My name is Pedro. I'm 11 years old. And this place is where I learned that the world can be better than the one we came from." Silence. "My brother and I used to eat soap from hunger. We slept scared, woke up scared, lived thinking no one would ever remember us. But Auntie Nana remembered. And then, so did Grandpa." He paused. His breath faltered. The emotion was heavy. "I want to say that kids don't need luxury. They need hugs, hot food, their names on paper. They need someone to look them in the eye and say, 'You matter.'" Paulo took the mic with trembling hands. "I don't talk as good as Pedro, but I remember our mom singing to us, and what she sang was that one day we'd have a home again, and we did. This place is home for lots of kids now. So, thank you, Mom." Those final words broke Augusto in the back of the room. He tried to hide it with a handkerchief, but he couldn't. When the applause came, no one stayed seated. Not the politicians, not the skeptics. There were people filming, crying, some who came just for show and left with their souls renewed. At the end, a reporter from a major network asked, "Boys, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Pedro answered, "I want to be a good man, like Grandpa is trying to be." Paulo replied, "I want to help kids, like Auntie Nana helped us." Augusto, from the back, murmured to himself, "They're already better than I ever dreamed of being." And that day, it wasn't just the institute that was inaugurated. A new generation was born. Oh, ChatGPT Dis. Time doesn't warn us when it decides to start collecting. It simply arrives and quietly takes everything. Strength in the legs, steadiness in the hands, memory of names, appetite for celebration. But sometimes it gives too. It gives peace. It gives silence. It gives that kind of understanding you only reach when you're no longer in a rush. Augusto now walked slowly, took his medicine without complaining, sat in the garden more than in his office, and lived with his gaze lost in the trees, as if talking to people who were no longer here. The boys, now almost teenagers, ran through the house with joy. And every evening they'd sit on the couch to tell their grandfather how their day went, school, friends, new dreams. It was in those moments that he smiled the most, even tired, even ill. One evening, Pedro came home from school with a paper in his hand. "Grandpa, we had to write an essay today. I wrote about our story." The teacher cried. She said she's going to send it to a newspaper. It might become a book. Augusto reached out his hand, read it slowly. And when he finished, he looked at his grandson with tear-filled eyes. "Then write it beautifully, my boy, but don't make me the hero. The hero was the one who loved you even when I didn't know how to love myself." After that, he stood with difficulty and went to his room. But that night, he didn't sleep there. He took an old blanket, a worn pillow, and settled into the rocking chair on the porch. The same spot where Mariana used to sit as a child to hear her father's stories before he became a stranger. The sky was clear, but the breeze was cold. The full moon lit the yard like a heavenly lantern. Augusto looked up, breathed deep, and pulled Mariana's medal from his pocket, the same one he'd kept since the day at the shelter. "My daughter, if you can hear me, know that I tried. I was late, I was wrong, but I tried. My knees are weak, but my heart, it's strong again, because it loves. And loving is all I have left." There, he closed his eyes, but not like someone falling asleep, like someone letting go. And in that early morning, while the city still slept, the old man passed. No pain, no scream, no regret, only the sound of his grandsons laughing from inside the house, and that was all he needed to take with him. A rich man's funeral usually means expensive flowers, air conditioning, rehearsed speeches, but Augusto's was not that. It was, as he had requested, simple, quiet, with more heart than wreaths. The casket was placed in the middle of the Instituto Mariana, not in a fancy city cemetery. That was his final wish. Let me leave from the place where I was reborn. Mrs. Nanny arrived early, in a dark dress, a modest veil, and a rosary between her fingers. She sat quietly for 30 minutes, speaking to no one. She simply looked at the man she had once hated, later forgiven, and ultimately taught. Because deep down, Nanny knew it was she who planted in him the courage to change. Pedro and Paulo arrived together, standing tall, holding pain without collapsing, dressed in white shirts, black pants, and carrying a framed photo. It showed the three of them, when the boys were still small, and Augusto already weary, with the two of them in his lap, smiling sincerely. They placed the photo next to the casket, along with their mother's medal. "So he can take it with him," Pedro said. That morning, no businessman came, no false friends. Only the children from the shelter, the mothers from the institute, and the employees who were once invisible in the mansion. Simple people, with tears in their eyes. People who had once been welcomed, because he had chosen to mend what he had destroyed with years of silence. An elderly woman approached the casket, a baby in her arms. She cried, didn't say a word, just left a wildflower atop the wood. The Institute's director read a short but soul-deep speech. Augusto Gouveia died the way he lived in his final years, in search of redemption, and perhaps the greatest inheritance he left can't fit in a vault, but in a hug that will never again be missing. At the end of the ceremony, Pedro asked to speak. He climbed the small makeshift pulpit, took a deep breath, and read a note he'd written himself. "My grandfather wasn't born good, but he died trying to be, and he did it. He was harsh. Then he was fair. Then he was ours, and now he's a memory." The room fell silent. Then Paulo approached with a guitar, and with trembling fingers, he played a melody they said was their mother's lullaby. No one knew the lyrics, but the melody said everything. It was sweet, it was sad, it was healing. Mrs. Nanny closed her eyes and cried in silence, but this time with a smile on her lips. Because of all the deaths she had witnessed in her hard life as a nanny, this was the only one that left flowers instead of thorns. When they carried the body to the grave, the city didn't stop. The world didn't change. But inside each person there, a seed had been planted. Life is painfully beautiful when we look back and see that our suffering was not in vain. That hunger turned into strength. That abandonment became mission. That what was once shame turned into light. And that's exactly what happened with Pedro and Paulo. Years passed since the funeral. The Instituto Mariana expanded. What began as a 5-room house turned into a campus with 3 buildings. From 20 children, they grew to 200. What started as an act of repair turned into a project of transformation, and at the heart of it all were the twins. Pedro, now 22, full hair, light beard, firm voice, a psychologist with honors, a specialist in childhood trauma, a boy who once fell asleep hungry, now teaching children how to cope with pain they can't yet name. Paulo chose a quieter path. He graduated as a social worker, learned to listen, became the invisible hand that holds things together when everything's falling apart. He visits families, delivers food late at night, sits on the floor with a mother who lost custody of her child and tells her, it's not over. One afternoon, during an interview for a documentary about the Institute, a journalist asked, "Do you realize the symbolic strength you two represent today?" Pedro smiled, without arrogance. "We are who we are because someone believed in us when everyone else looked away. And because there was one woman, Mrs. Nanny, who didn't just feed us. She gave us names, gave us ground, gave us truth," Paulo added. "And because there was one man who messed up badly, but had the courage to say sorry out loud. That changes everything." At the end of the interview, they were taken to a newly inaugurated wing of the Institute. The plaque was still covered with a cloth. The director pulled it back carefully. Donna Nanny Wing, Center for Affection and Protection. Inside, Rooms with psychologists, therapists, educational toys, hammocks, books, and flowers in the corners. A space designed not to fix, but to welcome. Pedro stood silently before the plaque, touched the name with his fingertips, and whispered she never had children of her own, but she birthed a whole generation of hope. That same day, a small, skinny boy with deep eyes hugged Paulo in the hallway. "Uncle, were you at the shelter too?" "I was." "And did everything turn out okay?" Paulo knelt, so he was eye level with the child, and answered, "It turned out better than I ever dreamed." And in that moment, with a hug tightly binding past and present, it became clear. The cycle had been broken. Poverty didn't become destiny, it became purpose, the end.